This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language.
For 2,000 years, the Western world has read a version of the most famous story ever told, with the final chapters missing. We were taught it ended at an empty tomb.
The Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything.
But high in the stone monasteries of Ethiopia, monks have quietly guarded a different and far older version of events. And inside are an account of what happened after the resurrection that the world was never allowed to read. Now, for the first time, those pages are being scanned, translated, and shared, and they do not match the story we know. The book with 15 extra chapters. The Bible most people grew up with has 66 books, but the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian churches still standing on earth, has 81. That is 15 more books than the Protestant Bible, sitting quietly inside their scripture, treated as holy and read in worship for well over 1,000 years. And these are not strange new inventions. They are ancient. They are texts that the earliest Christians once read and respected and treated as scripture before the Western Church quietly dropped them and let them fade from memory entirely. Books with strange names that most people have never once heard. For a long time, Western scholars waved all of this away. They said the Ethiopian Church had simply collected too much, that these extra books were late editions, medieval stories, not the real thing. But when someone actually tested the age of Ethiopia's oldest pages with hard science, and the laughing stopped very quickly. The pages that proved them right. In a monastery in the highlands of northern Ethiopia sits a set of gospels called the Garima Gospels. For years, outsiders assumed they were medieval, maybe 1,000 years old at the very most. Nothing remarkable. Then scientists at Oxford ran radiocarbon dating on the actual pages themselves. The results stunned everyone. The Garima Gospels were written somewhere between roughly 300 and 600 years after Christ. That makes them the oldest illustrated Christian manuscript in the entire world. Think about what that means. While much of Europe had fallen into its darkest, most broken centuries, while books were burning and knowledge was being lost across the land, Ethiopian monks in their mountain monasteries were carefully copying and protecting Christian scripture by hand. They were holding the line. They were keeping safe some of the purest, oldest source material that Christianity has anywhere in the world. So, when that same church tells us they preserve books the West threw away, it is no longer easy to dismiss them as confused. They have already been proven right once, by science, about the very oldest pages they hold. The people who laughed were the ones who turned out to be wrong. And the most shocking of those kept books is the one that explains a horror the regular Bible only barely hints at. The book the West deleted. In the Bible most people know, the Great Flood happens because mankind has become wicked. That is about all the detail you get. People were bad, so the waters came, and the world was washed clean. But the Book of Enoch, the one preserved in Ethiopia, tells a far stranger and far more disturbing version of why it had to happen. It describes something closer to an invasion from above. It says a group of angels, called the Watchers, 200 of them, came down to a mountain on earth, took human women as wives, and fathered a race of giants who were not fully human and not fully something else. The book does not keep this vague. It names the leaders of these fallen angels, Semyaza, Azazel, and it says they handed humanity knowledge it was never meant to have. How to forge weapons of war, how to work a metal, how to use cosmetics, how to read the stars and predict the future. This was not just sin in the simple sense of people misbehaving. In the book, it reads like forbidden technology being smuggled down to mankind by something from outside our world. And the flood becomes less a punishment for bad behavior and more a desperate reset. A way to scrub the earth of a bloodline that should never have existed. You can see why the Western Church grew deeply uncomfortable with all of this. It was wild. It was frightening. It described a spiritual world crawling with monsters and corrupted bloodlines. A reality far messier and more dangerous than the clean, orderly story the church wanted ordinary people to hear on a Sunday morning. So, over the centuries, it was quietly pushed out and allowed to disappear from the Western Bible entirely. But Ethiopia flatly refused to let it go. And that single decision to keep what the rest of the world deleted is the key that unlocks everything that follows. Why Ethiopia was different. To understand why Ethiopia kept these books, you have to understand that their Christianity did not arrive the way ours did. In most of the world, Christianity was spread by empires, very often by force, planted down on top of older religions that were then stamped out and erased. But in Ethiopia, it grew up in a completely different way and far earlier than most people realize. The ancient kingdom of Aksum adopted Christianity as its official state religion around the year 330, which makes Ethiopia one of the very first Christian nations anywhere on the planet, Christian earlier than almost all of Europe was. And just as importantly, it did not throw away its older roots when it converted. To this very day, Ethiopian Christians keep practices that look strikingly ancient. They avoid eating pork, the way the old Hebrew law commanded thousands of years ago. Many of them still keep a Saturday Sabbath, and not only the Sunday one. Their faith sits like a living bridge between the very old world and the new one, a form of Christianity that grew up almost completely untouched by the same hands that trimmed and edited and tidied up the faith everywhere else in the world. So, while the Western Church was busy in its big meetings, carefully deciding which books were safe and proper for ordinary people to be allowed to read, Ethiopia simply kept all of them. They never saw themselves as the editors of the story. They saw themselves as its guardians. And there is a world of difference between those two things, which raises the question that the whole world is suddenly asking. If they kept the books we lost, what exactly is written in them about the part of the story that matters most? The story that did not end at the tomb. Here is where it touches the very heart of the faith itself, the single event the whole religion is built upon. In the Bible, most people read, "The time between the resurrection and the moment Christ leaves the earth is short and thin. He appears a few times, he shows his wounds to a doubter, he shares a meal, he says a few parting words, and then he is gone, lifted away." The whole stretch passes in a blur of a few quiet verses, and most people could not tell you much about what happened in it. In the Ethiopian tradition, that same stretch of days is not a blur at all. It is the main event. Their scripture holds far more about what the risen Christ did and said in those final days before he left. Instead of a brief, gentle goodbye, there is a teaching, long, urgent, detailed teaching, given to the people closest to him, about how the world truly works, who really runs it, and what is coming for it in the ages ahead. The Western Bible hands you the empty tomb and then rushes you toward the ending. The Ethiopian books slow all the way down and stay in the room and write down what was said when there was no crowd left to hear it. So what? According to the material now being translated and shared, did the risen Christ spend those missing days talking about? A warning about the future. According to the Ethiopian material, the teaching in those final days was not gentle and comforting. It was a warning. The tradition describes the risen Christ preparing his followers for a long spiritual struggle, one that would stretch on for centuries, far beyond their own short lifetimes. He is described warning them not to place their trust in stone buildings and grand churches, because those things would one day crumble, and worse, would be twisted and misused by the very people running them. Build something inside yourself instead, the teaching says, something that no army and no empire can ever take from you or tear down. What unsettles people most is how much this reads like a warning about big organized religion itself. The tradition describes a caution that one day powerful men would wear long, fine robes, use his own name to gather up gold and power, and turn the symbol of his cross into a weapon pointed at other human beings. To people here now, knowing what actually happened over the last 2,000 years, it sounds uncomfortably like a direct description of the holy wars, the empires, and the greed for power that all came later, all of it carried out in his name. If this teaching really does warn against the exact churches and powers that later claimed to speak for him, then you can see, plain as day, why those same powers might not have wanted it sitting in everyone's hands. But to understand how seriously Ethiopia took its role as guardian, you have to see what else they claimed to protect. The things they guarded. In the city of Aksum, in a small guarded chapel, the Ethiopian church says it holds the Ark of the Covenant, the actual Ark, the golden chest from the Old Testament, the one the Bible describes as so powerful it could strike men dead. According to their tradition, it was brought out of Jerusalem thousands of years ago by Menelik, said to be the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and it has been protected on Ethiopian soil ever since. One single monk is chosen to guard it, and only one. Once he is chosen, he never leaves the grounds again for the rest of his life. He stays there, alone with it, praying until the day he dies. And only then is the next guardian named to take his place. No one else is ever permitted to enter that chapel. No scholar, no king, no president, no camera has ever been allowed inside to look. Now, is the Ark really in that small chapel? No outsider has ever been allowed to check, so no one on earth can actually prove it, and that is exactly the point worth sitting with. This is a belief, a tradition that goes back many centuries, not a tested and proven fact, and it should be held as exactly that. But the belief itself is real. It is genuinely ancient, and the Ethiopians have been willing to fight and die to protect that one chapel for hundreds of years without ever once opening it for the world. And people who will guard a single impossible thing that fiercely for that long are exactly the kind of people who would also guard a set of forbidden books with that same fierce, unshakable care. And the same hands that guarded the Ark and the books also carved something that engineers still cannot fully explain. The church is cut from solid rock. In a town called Lalibela, there are 11 churches that should not exist. They were not built by stacking stone on stone, the way every great cathedral in Europe was raised up brick by brick. They were carved downward out of solid volcanic rock. The workers started at ground level and cut down into the mountain itself, chipping away and removing everything that was not the church, until a finished building stood inside a deep open pit, complete with doors, windows, columns, carved ceilings, and even working drainage, all of it a single, connected, unbroken piece of stone. Think about how harsh and unforgiving that kind of work is. With a building made of separate blocks, a mistake can be fixed. You pull out the bad block and set a new one. With this, there is no such thing as a second chance. One cracked pillar, one chisel stroke that goes too deep, and the entire church is ruined forever, because you simply cannot glue a piece of rock back onto solid ground. And all 11 of these were carved roughly 800 years ago, supposedly in only a few short decades. The local tradition has its own answer for how such a thing was even possible. They say the human workers labored through the daylight hours, and then at night, when the men slept, angels came down and continued the work, carving twice as fast as any human hand ever could. It is a beautiful story, and of course, no one can prove a word of it. But go and stand in front of those churches in person. Look at what was carved out of that mountain without a single second chance, and you begin to understand why the people who made them reached for an explanation that went beyond ordinary human hands. This is the very same civilization, in the very same highlands, that swears on its life it kept the true and complete books of the faith. And the deeper you look into Ethiopia, the more this exact pattern keeps repeating itself. They protected things the rest of the world either lost along the way or never managed to have it all. So here's the question that makes all of this urgent. Why are we just hearing about it now? Why now? For most of the last 2,000 years, these books sat in remote mountain monasteries, written in an ancient language, guarded by monks, almost completely out of reach. Most of the world had no idea they even existed. That changed only very recently. In the last few years, and especially in early 2026, Ethiopian heritage groups began carefully scanning these ancient manuscripts page by page and releasing the high-resolution images to the public. Copies of pages that no outside scholar had ever once been permitted to study are now sitting online, free for anyone to open. Clips filmed at manuscript gatherings inside Ethiopia have spread across the internet to millions of people who had no idea any of this existed. The seal that kept these texts hidden away for more than 1,000 years has, very quietly and without much warning, been broken. That is the real reason this subject is suddenly everywhere you look right now. It is not a rumor someone started. It is not a hoax or a piece of fiction dressed up as fact. It is a genuine release of genuinely ancient material that the Western world never had in its hands. hitting the open internet faster than scholars can even study and explain it. And that flood of newly opened pages is forcing a question that a great many people, in a great many churches, would honestly rather not have to ask out loud. What this actually changes. So, after all of it, what does this really change? It does not erase the story most people know. The empty tomb is still there. The resurrection is still the center of it. But it strongly suggests, with real evidence standing behind it, that the version we were handed was the short one, the summary, the safe edit, trimmed down and tidied up for the masses, and that a fuller, older, stranger version was quietly kept alive the entire time, in a place the rest of the world simply was not bothering to look. And this is the part that is not up for debate. The 81 books are real. You can count them. The Book of Enoch and its watchers are real, and preserved in full in Ge'ez when the West let them vanish. The Garima Gospels really are among the oldest Christian manuscripts on Earth, and that is not a believer's claim. It was proven by Oxford scientists with radiocarbon dating. The larger body of teaching about the days after the resurrection genuinely exists in that tradition. What you choose to make of it is the only open question left. Maybe the Western Church simply made calm, sensible decisions about which books to keep and which to set aside, and Ethiopia happened to keep a few extra. That is the comfortable answer. Or maybe, as more and more people are starting to believe, we were quietly handed a lighter, softer version of our own history, with the most challenging pages removed, while the complete version sat protected by monks in the mountains the whole time, waiting for the moment the world was finally ready or finally desperate enough to read it. Either way, the books are open now. The pages are being scanned and translated and posted where anyone can see them. And the story that a billion people thought they knew by heart is turning out to have whole chapters they were never once shown. If the oldest church on earth quietly kept books the rest of us lost, then who exactly decided what the rest of us were allowed to read? And what else did they choose to leave out? Tell us honestly what you believe in the comments, because these pages are open now and they are not closing again.